Dark Souls 2, the much criticized sequel to Dark Souls and definitely the ugly child of the Souls series family. But does it actually deserve this treatment? Is Dark Souls 2 secretly a masterpiece and it's really all the other games that suck? Well, no, actually. After having spent 45 hours doing a Soul Level 1 run of this game, I can definitively say that it is worse than the other games in the series by far. But that doesn't mean it's worth throwing away completely. In fact, it was my first Souls game and it has a special place in my heart because of that. And for that reason, I decided to do a challenge run and subsequent video of this game. And man, when I started this run, I did not even close to understand the level of pain I was going to experience. So join me on this masochistic look into Dark Souls 2 at Soul Level 1. And I'll be focusing on the bosses aspect of the game and ranking every boss in the game according to how difficult it was at Soul Level 1, and I'll be organizing them into a tier list based on attempt numbers, just like the tier list I'm showing here. With that, let's get into it. Also, someone explain this cutscene to me, it has never made sense. First up is the Dragonrider, and I actually missed the cheese on him the first time, but luckily he was courteous enough to just walk off the cliff on his own accord. Thanks, Dark Souls 2. He took one attempt and that lands him in the game's journalist tier. Next up is the Pursuer, and he's a pretty simple fight. You generally strafe to the right, wait for that stab attack, get a couple hits in, and repeat. He also commonly has this attack where he rushes you and swipes from your left to your right. That is also a very exploitable attack. I'll admit I have a good amount of experience with this boss, so this wasn't exactly a fair thing to rank him at, but he does end up in the game's journalist tier as well. Up next is the Last Giant, and he's so slow, you don't even need any sort of strategy here. He doesn't do enough damage to kill in one hit, so you can really just whack at his ankles, tank his hits, and dodge when you feel like it, but it's really not necessary. He's just a really easy boss. Yeah, game's journalist here. Up next is the Skeleton Lords, and the Skeleton Lords are yet another forgettable early game boss that doesn't really require any strategy to beat. You just run around these mounds and run up and get the hits in when you can. They do no damage, so you really don't have much to worry about as long as you have life gems. Yeah, games journalist here for them as well. Up next is the Flexile Sentry, yet another forgettable boss who can be beaten simply by waiting for him to attack, rolling to the right, and then wailing on him. He doesn't really do enough damage to pose a real threat with life gems, so yeah, games journalist here yet again. Conjoined Twins had their one appearance in media and man, they blew it. Up next is everyone's favorite extra thick boy, the Covetous Demon, and that's embarrassing. Yeah, that's right, the Covetous Demon was the first boss that I actually died to. But it wasn't because he was particularly hard. The main thing that you need to do is just stay near his tail, and he can't really hit you. I got him on the second try, putting him in the one up from the bottom tier, the first boss to do so. A beautiful Dark Souls 2 moment right here that I just had to remember. The headless guys are butt lickers and killed me so many times. Up next, and my personal second most shameful Dark Souls related fap, Mytha, the Baneful Queen. And again, the story repeats, she really just wasn't that hard. She has a very exploitable stab attack where you can just strafe to the right. Her grab attack didn't even kill here, as you can see. She really isn't doing enough damage to be a real threat, so yeah, she ends up being another forgettable boss that isn't very mechanically interesting. Who would have thought? I killed her in just one attempt, adding her to the crowded bottom tier. The boss may have been terrible, but on the plus side, at the top of Earthen Peak, you get to go up an elevator and make it to a lava ocean. Don't you just love Dark Souls 2 game design? Up next, Royal Rat Vanguard, a boss fight where you basically fight a bunch of rats trying to kill one specific rat. And basically the strategy behind the fight is if you can run around the edge of the battlefield and just kite the rats in a way and occasionally pick one off when you have the opportunity, you can easily win. As you can see, I spent a lot of time in the second attempt running around the boss room looking for an opportunity to kill the rats. But once you finally get a hold of Vanguard, he has like no HP, so he went down on the second attempt. Up next is Quelaag 2, appropriately existing in the game Dark Souls 2. And she was the first boss to do enough damage to pose a real threat to me. Like, her attacks come out quick enough to where it was actually something I had to think about while fighting. She has a couple combos that can kill me from full health, so that is something that you definitely have to watch out for. But ultimately, if you stay to her right side and roll through some of the spin attacks that she does, there's really not much she can do to get you at that point. She took 4 attempts and joins the Covetous Demon and Vanguard in the second. Up next, and one of many gank fights in this game, is the Ruined Sentinels. And the Ruined Sentinels are probably the best designed gank fight in the game, with the way you start up on this ledge and all. And they did manage to kill me once, but if you can manage to kill the first one pretty quickly before the second one jumps up, you have a pretty good shot. As for the Sentinels individually, the strategy remains the same as other bosses. Strafe around them and circle on their telegraphed attacks. Nothing really too difficult here. And after killing the first one, then you just drop down and it's basically the crowd control game from there on out. I was able to just generally stay in a safe position until an opportunity presented itself, and then went in for a few attacks. The Sentinels took just 2 attempts, putting them in the tier 1 up from the bottom. Up next, we have literally just a bunch of enemies thrown into a room and rebranded as a boss. No, I'm not kidding, that's what Prowling Magus and the Congregation essentially is. And embarrassingly enough, they did have me on the ropes for a bit, but you can thankfully hide behind these benches if you ever need a break during this fight. And I killed them on the first try, so yeah, they go in the bottom tier. Up next is the Belfry Gargoyles, another boss copy-pasted from Dark Souls, and they function similarly to the Ruined Sentinels in that you just run around the boss room and wait for opportunities to attack. They don't do enough damage to really threaten me, so I was actually able to kill them on the first try, putting them in the crowded bottom tier. Up next, and yet another boss copy-pasted from Dark Souls 1, Ornstein. And they did Ornstein a great disservice by making him deal dark damage and generally being much slower. Circle strafing plus life gems got me an easy win, and Ornstein is shamed by being in the bottom tier. Next, I decided to fight the Rotten, and he actually does pose a significant threat in that he can one-shot me with a couple of his different attacks. Ultimately though, he's really not that hard. All you really need to do is circle strafe and then roll when you need to. Once I was able to get the timing down of all of his heavy hitting attacks, he was pretty easy. All of his attacks leave him open for revenge attacks from the player, so if you learn how to dodge them, he becomes pretty easy. I was able to beat him on my 6th attempt, making him the first boss to make it to the 3rd tier from the bottom. Up next, and the second great boss that I decided to fight, the Duke's Dear Freja. And this one really surprised me. This one actually ended up being far easier than I thought. The spider is extremely slow, and you can just walk around to the back head anytime the front head is doing an attack and get some free damage in and just infinitely repeat that process until she's dead. The small spiders do complicate things a little bit, and sometimes she sprays this goo that slows you down that can be scary, but I don't know if I got lucky or what, but I was able to beat her on my first try without too much trouble. Freja is shamed by being one of the big 4 bosses and in the bottom tier. Next, I decided to fight the Smelter Demon, but before that, I just want to express how much of a hell the Iron Keep is. This area is pure torture. I don't know what the game designers were thinking here. They put in 2 invaders that invade you even if you're hollow, and like 40 Alonne Knights are just peppered throughout the area, some of them with great bows. It's just pure frustration. I don't know what the developers were thinking doing this. Like, what could it possibly have been? Oh, how do we make this area hard? Oh, I know. Herther, let's put like 40 enemies and give some of them great bows in the same area. That's hard, right? Any of you Dark Souls 2 fans out there, play the Iron Keep and Scholar of the First Sin and tell me this is a good game. You can't do it. So after grinding down all of the Alonne Knights until they stop respawning, I finally got a good number of attempts in on the Smelter Demon, and he's tough. This is the first boss in the game that is like an actual legitimate Dark Souls boss, in the sense that you have to actually pay attention to what he's doing and adjust your strategy. There's no like one brute force way to kill him. My general strategy was to strafe around to the left, but you still have to watch for his jumping attack and watch for the flames whittling you down. But yeah, I would say the Smelter Demon proved to be a fun, interesting, and challenging boss that was the highlight of an absolutely awful area. He took me 19 attempts, and that makes him the first boss to make it to the Gamer tier. Up next, and the third boss out of the big 4, is the old Iron King, and he is laughably slow. He actually just lets you wail on him after he attacks. Like, look how long he's standing there. I was completely able to heal, and he did not threaten me at all. There is a couple things to watch out for in this boss fight, like you can accidentally roll off into the lava, like I do here. And he also has a couple of attacks that I think kill me in one hit, so it's not completely safe, but it's pretty easy. Like, look how long he gives me to attack him, and look at the huge chunks of damage he takes from a plus 10 mace with barely any strength. Oh, also you have this little cubby hole to hide in and heal if you need it, and he only has 1 attack that can get you here. Anyway, he took just 2 attempts, putting him in the tier 1 up from the bottom. Now we've made it to the final of the big 4 bosses, the Lost Sinner. And she's a little tougher than I think the rest of the big 4 bosses. She definitely does a bit more heal punishing and a bit more of a variety of attacks so that you have to dodge in different ways. So in that sense she's harder than the other bosses, but in another sense she has like no HP. Like, you can see the mace absolutely chunking her with just some magic juice on it. It was a more challenging fight, but ultimately she only took 3 attempts. Those 3 attempts put her in the crowded tier 1 up from the bottom. Oh god no, we've made it to Royal Rat Authority. And Royal Rat Authority at Soul Level 1 is one of the most BS bosses ever conceived, I kid you not. It is extremely difficult to kill the 4 toxic rats that run at you as a unit, by the way. You cannot aggro just one. At the beginning of the fight, they run at you, they toxic you, and by the time you get a chance to heal, the big rat is on you, so it's almost impossible to heal once you've been toxic. You're basically dead. And what I'm showing you on screen now is like my best attempts. Most of my attempts end like this next one, where I just get toxicked in the beginning by the 4 small dogs, some of my mace swings miss, and then I'm just done. I put in like 30 attempts at this point in the game, and there was one attempt where I was able to get a single hit in on the big boss. Like, so many attempts just go down the drain so quickly. It's disgusting. I was so frustrated with this boss, I actually put it on hold and came back to it later in the run. But when I came back with a plan. I did the Lingering Flame Pyromancy to pick off the 4 little rats quite easily, and it's very fun seeing them explode like that. And then the boss becomes just a fight where you're basically going to want to stay underneath the big rat until the vomit attack comes out, run away, repeat. It's a relatively simple fight after that, but I really wish I had known about Lingering Flame sooner. This boss took a whopping 33 attempts, and that puts him in the top tier. We've made it to the late game bosses, so surely things start getting difficult, right? Well, no, actually. With the twin Dragonriders boss, it's just 2 copies of a boss we fought earlier where one of them starts out with a great bow, and they don't do that much damage and they don't have that much HP. And I did get kinda lucky on this attempt with them by not getting hit by the great arrows, but really it's just as simple as rolling through their heavily telegraphed hits and timing your attacks properly where you don't get hit by the other one while you're attacking one of them. And just watch how little health the second one has. Literally a 4-shot from the mace with aromatic ooze on it. The 2 attempts put them in a low tier, and man, the early part of this game is bottom heavy. Up next is a boss that really made me look in the mirror and question why I'm doing this. Just kidding, the Mirror Knight was super easy. But you like the mirror joke, right? Anyway, yeah, the hardest part of this fight is when he summons, but fortunately the Mirror Knight himself doesn't move fast enough to always have a hit on you while you're fighting the summon. And he's super slow, so you can really have a chance to get in your hits once he's done swinging, and it's not too complicated of a fight. He did kill me twice though, so that does put him just out of reach of all games journalists. Quick side note, Shrine of Amana sucks. I don't know what they were thinking when they made it. The mage soul arrow thingies have like a continuous hitbox, so you can't completely roll through them. There's a bullshit number of enemies, and the water that you have to trudge through just is the icing on the cake. It's just a terrible area. And of course, one of the hardest areas in the game surely leads to a difficult boss, right? Well, no. Demon of Song did manage to kill me a couple times, but he's pathetically slow, and a lot of his attacks are extremely telegraphed. I don't know how I got grabbed here, by the way. But the only reason I died even 3 times to him was because his attacks kill me in like 1 hit. If it weren't for that, this would be a super easy boss. Yeah, no real special strategy was needed here. I did lose my patience and waste a bright bug on him, but as long as I avoided the one-shot attacks, I was good. With the 4 attempts he took, he is yet another addition to the crowded bottom tiers. Up next is probably the best designed boss in the base game, so outside of the DLCs, and that's Velstadt. And at level 1 he's a decent challenge too. With my limited iframes due to not being able to level adaptability, rolling through his attacks actually requires some pretty precise timing. And he's pretty decent at heal punishing, but luckily he does have a good few attacks that are pretty exploitable, especially the magic attacks in phase 2. You can really exploit these. Like, watch him here. He takes so long to back up and start initiating the magic attack. I had time to heal and run behind him and kill him. He did take 11 attempts though, putting him in the child gamer tier. Next up is the boss that guards the dragon area, appropriately named Guardian Dragon. And he's a slightly more interesting fight than most of the fights so far, in that you have to really watch what he's doing when he flies up to see if he's doing the straight down flame attack, the from the wall flame attack or the fireball attack and dodge accordingly. And most of those attacks I just mentioned will kill you in one hit, so you really have to pay attention to what he's doing. One thing I did notice about this fight is that locking on is completely detrimental in this fight. You definitely want to play unlocked. It makes it a lot easier. But yeah, what this fight really comes down to is watching for the fire attacks, dodging them, and getting hits in when you can. And it took me 6 attempts, putting him alongside the Rotten on our tier. The next fight goes out to all you foot lovers out there, the Ancient Dragon. That's right, this is the fight where you stand between a giant being's toes and hope he doesn't do a certain attack in order to get the win. Seriously though, you go to his left hind leg, stand between the innermost and the middle toe, and just whack away at him until he lifts it up. Then you walk forward, loop around, and continue the cycle. The only issue with this strategy is when he flies up and shoots the fire downward onto the battlefield, you have to run away quickly. And eventually I was able to recognize this attack when it was happening and dodge it. That's what ultimately got me the win, but I did die a few times to that attack before securing the victory. Ancient Dragon took 6 attempts, putting him in the same tier with the Rotten and the Guardian Dragon. Next, we are so spiteful towards giants as a race that we not only finished them off in the present, we decided to go into the past to beat them up too. And the Giant Lord ended up being kind of a pushover. He did get me a couple times with some attacks that I wasn't ready for, but ultimately if you just generally stay between his legs and dodge the stomp attack, you're good to go. He took just 3 attempts, and that adds him to our second from the worst tier. Next up is the King, Vendrick. And Vendrick, all of his attacks kill you in one hit at level 1, so that's something to watch out for. But on the plus side, he is insanely slow. Probably the slowest boss in the game that leaves you just massive windows to attack. And I guess you don't ever need to heal because all the attacks kill you in one hit. But you can just get 5, 6 hits in between his attacks, and they're so easy to strafe around, it's ridiculous. I killed him just in 2 attempts, putting him in the second from the worst tier. We've made it to the Throne Watcher and Defender, and this is where the run really starts to fall apart. This boss is a very poor attempt at recreating the magic of Ornstein and Smo. The problem with this boss is that you have 2 enemies in armor, but they're both approximately the same level of speed, and they stay glued to each other basically the entire fight. The windows to attack are very few and far between, and they're even hard to identify when they happen. The edge of the boss arena is a void, which adds another layer of artificial difficulty. Each death in this fight, even at level 1, just feels like complete nonsense. It is a utterly disrespectful boss by design. So much so to the point where I resorted to cheesing this boss after about 30 attempts. This game handed me lemons in this fight, and you know what? I am squeezing those lemons right back in this game's eyes. Screw you, Dark Souls 2. Screw this boss. This run is moving on whether you like it or not. This boss is so hard that even cheesing it took like 10 attempts. The total attempt number was 35, and that puts them in the top tier. Up next, and the original final boss, Nashandra. Nashandra is not too bad. She's pretty slow, just like a lot of the other bosses on this list. And she's a late game boss, so she has several attacks that can kill me in one hit at this point. But if you generally stay away from the curse thingies and bait out the laser attack and use that to get a few hits in, it's not too complicated of a fight. I was able to kill her on the 3rd attempt, putting her pretty low on the list. And now for the final boss, Aldia. And a few things to know about Aldia at level 1 is when he teleports onto you, you die. That's a one-shot. He has this fire ring that he puts around him that can kill you pretty quickly, especially in phase 2. Like, it pretty much kills you if you get caught in it, but if you avoid that, most of his attacks are very easily dodgeable. And this attack where he charges up the large fireball is very exploitable. You can get a lot of hits in while he does this, and that's what got me the win. Aldia took 6 attempts and joins our speed bump tier. Oh yeah, I forgot about the Executioner's Chariot. Yeah, he's a pretty easy boss, just don't let a bunch of skeletons gang up on you at once, and don't let him run you over, similar to in Elden Ring, and yeah, what more can be said about this? He did manage to run me over once, but I was able to kill him on the second attempt. And now we've reached the point in the run where every boss is agony. Starting with the Kingdom Hearts transplant, the Darklurker. And what can I say about the Darklurker? He's an extremely hard boss. The first phase, not so much. Once you memorize all of his attacks, the first phase is actually pretty easy to get past. Once you memorize his sword swipe attacks, you can literally just strafe around to the left, and it makes a very easy opportunity to get some attacks in. But then he mitoses like this, and then you have 2 of them to deal with, and it's just infinitely harder. Having to watch 2 copies of this boss who both have ranged attacks that kill you in one hit and can summon the little portal dark ball, it becomes seriously difficult. And you know, it's a kind of a gank fight at that point, but if it wouldn't be that bad if it wasn't for the immense amount of BS that you have to go through to get back to this boss every time. You have to pay an effigy. Then you have to kill 3 late game NPCs and a mage enemy. And it's total agony. I don't know why the game designers would do this. They're just making it hard, arbitrarily hard, with no like satisfying payoff whatsoever. Fortunately, I was able to learn how to get 2 of the NPCs to jump off the cliff most of the time, but it's still way too much price to pay for dying. Darklurker took 39 attempts, and that makes him the hardest boss in the game to this point. On to the DLCs, and the first boss I decided to fight was Aava, the King's Pet. And she's a very difficult boss. A lot of her attacks require very precise roll timing, and some of the hitboxes are a little questionable. Like the jumping attack has a hitbox on her back knee, which requires you to then roll to the right every time. Which isn't too bad, but it was a little tough to learn. It took me quite a few attempts. Yeah, she can jump through the statues, by the way. But the one thing that I did have going for me that was very major in this fight is that she's weak to thrust damage, and my main weapon was the rapier, so that helped out a lot. And I did think I got a bit lucky on this 22nd attempt, so I think Aava could have been higher on the tier list. But ultimately I was able to kill her after 22 attempts, and that puts her 1 down from top tier. Up next is Elana, the Squalid Queen. And I know I'm going out of order a bit here, but I wanted to save the hardest bosses for last. Anyway, Elana is a fairly difficult boss. She has a lot of attacks that can kill me in one hit, and worst of all, she has a chance to summon Velstadt. And there are a couple of strategies I employed for this fight. All of her magic attacks can actually be strafed around so long as you're not dealing with her summons, so that's a pretty good way to get some easy damage. And when she does summon, the 3 skeletons kill 2 of them but leave 1 of them alive. He's way worse at chasing you than Velstadt, and with him alive, it makes her way less likely to summon Velstadt. It still is possible, and I don't know exactly what the circumstances are, but it seems like that she gave a lot of time before she summoned again, whereas if you kill the 3rd skeleton, she summons again almost immediately. Anyway, Elana took 22 attempts, putting her in the 2nd from the top tier. Up next is yet another Gank Squad fight. I don't even know what to call this boss. You can see their names on the screen, but it's a Gank Squad. And just by themselves, they probably aren't too hard of a fight, but the run to get back to them is absolutely devastating. So after a couple of deaths, I decided I was just going to cheat. And the basic strategy behind my cheese is to run around the boss room repeatedly, whittling down the NPC with the great bow until I finally kill her. Then, standing in this one very specific spot, I can pull out a whip, put some rotten pine resin on it, and poison the other two NPCs to death. And it does take a bit of time, but you're completely safe behind these stalactites right here. And by the way, for this to work, you have to have the dexterity ring and the work hook equipped in your offhand, otherwise you won't have the dexterity to use the whip. And on top of that, you must use the R2 attack from the whip. If you use the R1, you will fall off of this ledge. And yeah, eventually I was able to secure a pretty easy victory on the Gank Squad. The Gank Squad took just 4 attempts, and that puts them in great company in the second from the bottom tier. And now we've made it to my favorite part of the video, the literal peak of Dark Souls 2, the best designed boss in the entire game, Sinh the Slumbering Dragon. And the reason I say that he's the best boss in the game is that his movesets lead to some very complicated interactions with the player. And what I mean by that is you really have to watch his attacks, especially when he flies up. He has like 3 different things he can do when he flies up. He either shoots the fireball, he swoops at you with fire, or he swoops at you without fire. And then he can either land by swooping at you, or just go straight down and land. And every time he flies up, it becomes a really intense positioning battle, because the wrong move will get you killed at level 1 for sure. And when you're on the ground, you want to stay close to him or underneath him so that you don't bait out his charging attack or his fire from the ground attack, both of which are very hard to dodge. But staying close or underneath him gets more complicated when he's below 50% health, because he then gains this attack that can get you while you're even underneath him. And in order to dodge that attack, you have to watch Sin's face even as you're attacking him late in the fight. So the whole fight becomes an intense positioning battle where you're watching his face as well as staying underneath him when you can, and it becomes a really mechanically complex fight that's very satisfying. The fight is extremely difficult though. It requires very precise execution for a decently long period of time, so it did take me quite a few attempts. And this attempt right here broke my heart. I was so close, but I was able to get him a few attempts later. Another great thing about this fight is that there's like almost no run back to it, which shows that the developers do know what makes a good gaming experience, but they just chose not to do it most of the time, which is very bizarre. But anyway, yeah, Sinh overall is a challenging but fair fight that left me really satisfied after killing him. He took me 45 attempts, making him the toughest boss to this point. But those 45 attempts really didn't feel as bad as the 39 on Darklurker. After dying like 20 times in the hell that is Broom Tower at Soul Level 1, I finally made it to the bottom, and what's my reward? Fighting the Fume Knight. And I gotta say, before I fought Sinh and the Fume Knight, my opinion of Dark Souls 2 was getting dangerously low. Like, there was almost nothing to redeem this game after fighting like 25 forgettable bosses and dying 300 times to enemy spam and areas. But I will say, Sinh and Fume Knight have kinda brought it back for me. And what's really great about the Fume Knight is in his first phase, when he has the 2 swords, the small one comes out really fast and is hard to dodge, requires some precise timing and knowledge of the fight. And the big one hits really hard, but is much slower and gives you an opportunity to heal if you need it. So it creates a challenging but fair experience. And then in the second phase, when he buffs his sword and starts pulling out the magic, he gains a whole new moveset, and you really have to watch what he's doing to watch for the exploitable attacks. In phase 2, every hit that he does on you is going to be a one-shot, so from half health to dead, it's a really intense battle that requires very precise decision making and execution. And once I was finally able to get that last hit on him, it was really exciting. My heart was really pumping. This is a great boss. I'm going to say it's the second best boss in the game behind Sinh. But in terms of difficulty, he took me 35 attempts, which does put him in the top tier, but puts him behind Darklurker and Sinh for the toughest bosses in the game. Up next is the Blue Smelter Demon, a boss that was simply copy-pasted from the base game and powered up. So I had the advantage of knowing his moveset ahead of time, but I also had the disadvantage of him killing me in one hit with almost any attack he does, And the blue fire is like twice as annoying as the original fire. It seems to do more damage. He might have attacks that are slightly faster. I couldn't tell for sure. Some of them seemed a little suspicious. I don't know if they're a little different than the original Smelter Demon. Also, they somehow made the run back to him worse than the regular Smelter Demon. Anyway, he took me 20 attempts. I did get kinda lucky, but that puts him third from the top tier. Up next is a boss that has the literal worst run back I have ever seen in my life. Just look at the number of Alonne knights, not to mention the lizards that are chasing me here, and I'm just in the very beginning of this area trying to get to Sir Alonne. Like, look at this. This is ridiculous. How am I supposed to kill this boss? And then once you do finally get to the boss, he's insanely quick and insanely difficult. How is a sane person supposed to make this? But that's when it occurred to me. I get it. I get it now. This is Dark Souls 2 excellent storytelling in action. It killed me repeatedly in disrespectful way to make me in real life go hollow and truly relate to this game. Like, if you truly think about it really hard and then gaslight yourself, this is just excellent storytelling on what it means to be cursed and to go hollow. An absolutely brutal run back to a boss that allows you literally zero window to heal. Anyway, I had totally had enough of this boss, and especially of the run back, so I cheesed him. You can get him caught on this pillar here and break his AI, basically. There's a chance he can break out of it, but you can just get him stuck again, so that's basically what I did. I got killed a bunch of times trying to execute this cheese, but eventually I got it to work twice in one fight where he didn't move the second time, and that's what you're seeing here. So screw this boss, screw this run back, and I don't know, he took like 40 attempts. Phew, I'm glad that's over. One of the final two bosses couldn't be worse than what I just talked about, right? They couldn't be worse! Oh, did I say Sir Alonne had the worst run back I've ever seen? Oh, the very next boss that I decided to find had an even worse run back. You have to walk through this blizzard field where these butthole deer are running around that can easily kill you and did kill me many times. And once you do finally get past the deer, you get to a boss that is an absolutely devastating gank fight. And it's a copy of an earlier boss, so it's not even something unique. Like, this is just jaw-dropping levels of disrespectful game design. It's really insane. And yeah, what can I say about the fight itself? It's just the same as Aava, but they each have slightly less HP. You can theoretically kill Lud before Zalin even walks up to you, so kind of DPSing him is your best hope, but that's a really risky strategy and ended up killing me a lot of the time. But on the other hand, if you let it turn into a gank fight, you're pretty much screwed. They don't have any like synergy. One of them usually doesn't hang back, and they'll just maul you. Oh, and there's two other terrible things about this fight that I forgot to mention so far. One of them is that usually you will run out of weapon durability, either from killing the deer or just from the boss fight itself. So for this fight, I had to bring the mace and the rapier. And on top of all of that, if you get Zalin on low health, he starts a third phase where he starts regenning health. As if the rest of this boss wasn't enough insult to the player. This is disgraceful. This is terrible. This is the worst boss I've ever faced. I nearly cried at this attempt here. But a dozen or so attempts later, I was able to get him into the same position, and after grinding down many of the deer till they stopped respawning, carrying two weapons on me at the same time, walking through the snowfield for 5 minutes in over 60 attempts, I finally prevailed here. This was one of the biggest reliefs I ever felt, because I didn't have to walk through that nonsense snowfield ever again. To answer the question in the title, this is the hardest boss in the game at Soul Level 1. Lud and Zalin took me 60 attempts. Oh, finally, I'm almost done with Dark Souls 2. The final boss is the Burnt Ivory King. And this fight is absolutely brutal, mostly because of the gank fight at the beginning. You get 4 of your own ice Lois soldiers or whatever, but the amount of the charred ones that come out greatly outpaces them, at least double. Like, it's like an 8 on 5 most of the time. And the charred knights just know to like run after you and stab you in the back when you're attacking the other one. And on top of that, multiple waves of them come for a while. So it's like a brutal like 5-minute gank fight survival game just to get one attempt at the burnt Ivory King. Now don't get me wrong, the fight is a pretty cool idea in theory, but at soul level 1 it becomes difficult and not in a way that is satisfying like Sinh or the Fume Knight. It feels cheaply difficult. Now as for the burnt Ivory King himself, he's pretty quick, pretty tough to beat, reasonably a fair fight. I'd say he's a good boss. The bad part of this fight is the 5-minute gank army battle thing that you have to do every single time. Like, I had to kill so many of the charred Lois soldiers in that gank fight that before long I had their entire set, including shield and sword. And it's not like they're super rare drops, but it's just incredible to get all of them when there's like 6 pieces. Anyway, after a brutal grind, I was able to memorize the burnt Ivory King's moveset enough to actually stand a chance against him, and I had a pretty lucky attempt on this one. And the Ivory King took me 33 attempts, and that puts him in the top tier, making this the final tier list, with the hardest bosses being Lud and Zalin, followed by Sinh, followed by Sir Alonne. I think Royal Rat Authority surprised me the most with how excruciating it was. Since you've made it this far, I would like to say thank you for watching, and also this challenge run has given me a new perspective on Dark Souls 2. I always kind of thought it was mediocre. And running it at level 1 has really shown me actually it's worse than I ever thought. I've never been so relieved to be done with a challenge run as I was when I finally killed the burnt Ivory King. And now I can move on to better games. And it's not just that the run was hard. This was the most difficult challenge run I've ever done, so it was hard. But it's also just so demoralizing in the ways that it kills you. The endless gank squads, the absolute nonsense runbacks to bosses. Just, ugh. It leaves me with a sour taste in my mouth, but at the same time a sense of accomplishment for having done it. So please, if you would, leave a like on this video for my suffering. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.